earther. Explains this. Most political debates are just debates about what is true or false, unfortunately. As long as you can see one person isn't willing to engage in meaningful analysis, and that's why the break occurs, it's still worthwhile. What do you think? I still don't know whose side they're on for these. It's not about them changing each other. It's about influencing you and your opinion. I know exactly what you mean. Why are they even having this DB on the podcast? Douchebag? I guess are they probably talking about me? Stop giving Destiny a platform unless you're trying to get more likes and exposure on your podcast. 11 thumbs up. Wow. Oh, I like listening to Destiny debating things.
Buddy.
What? Hi, what's up?
Debate, and it was like paywalled behind Rumble, so can you just like TLDR it? How'd the rest of it go?
I don't fucking remember. This whole conversation was probably the same as this, though.
And you don't remember what he said about January 6th and all that shit?
I think he defended it, but then I think I brought up like the electoral scheme, and it seems like he wasn't even aware of it. So I don't even know. It's fucking stupid.
Well, he worked for Trump, so he probably wouldn't know what Trump was up to. It's probably the only way you could survive in that job.
Possibly, yeah.
A couple of things, though. I think you killed it, dude. I think that the one that I think that probably the best point that you made with respect to like domestic record, that I think even Constantine, the fact that he recognized like, hey, that was a really good point. You should probably try to answer this, Sebastian. Is the managerial and administrative stuff. The fact that so many Trump supporters and former cabinet officials and advisors, either sideline the guy or won't support him. I love the fact that you kept hitting that. Did you think that that was like a worthwhile thing to pursue and that you might pursue in other debates?
Maybe I could have. That was actually going to be one of my bigger points for that Alex Jones debate.
I love the fact the one with Greenwald.
Yeah, fuck. Hold on, give me 1 second.
Sure.
Oh yeah, I wanted to literally just like run down a list. I even like prepared a whole last list of people for this. It was Bill Stepien, his national field director, Chris Miller, his director for national counter, William Barr, Jeffrey Rosen, Richard Donahue, Chris Steyerwalt. Like these
Mark
are all
Esper.
like high. Yeah, yep. Jason Miller, Mike Pence, Matthew Morgan, Brad Raffensperger, Brian Kemp. The group of Republicans that went through his the 4 federal judges and the 2 former senators, a lawyer, and someone who worked at Capitol Hill for 20 years. Yeah, the criticisms of his like voter fraud stuff. I could just run down a list. It's insane that you could be surrounded by so many people that don't like you.
Yeah, so I DM'd you. There's a clip. I don't know if you remember who Anthony Scaramucci was, but he was like Trump's communications director for like 10 minutes, and he's one of the 40 ex-Trump supporters who will not endorse him and are endorsing President Biden. And he has a really good metaphor. He's like, the thing is, there is no rational counter argument to this. He's like, if we were 40 members on the board of directors for a pharmaceutical company and we signed a letter saying, do not take this drug, it will kill you, nobody would take the fucking drug. Or if we worked for an auto company and said, hey, this car will kill you, don't buy this car, nobody would buy the car. So he makes a good point that there is no rational counter argument to the fact that so many handpicked Trump appointees are now saying don't vote for the guy.
Yeah, but I mean, like their response is always going to be the deep state, right? Well, that's because they're all part of the deep state. They have to say this, otherwise they're going to get Seth Riched by Hillary Clinton.
Well, to your point, I mean, that's where it's proof it's a religion, right?
Because yeah, of course.
If Trump picks, if anything good happens on Trump's watch, it was because of him. If people are criticizing him, that's proof of the deep state, and it may be a 4D chess move to expose these people for a second Trump term, so he knows not to hire them. It's all unfalsifiable shit. But I thought you killed that part. The other thing I think it was good that you mentioned in chat, or somebody pushed back on this in chat, which is like, well, both sides, neither side. It was in reference to the border bill, and somebody in chat said neither side will put what's good for the country ahead of partisanship. If this ever comes up, I think a good example is the fact that in 2020, when COVID hit, both sides, well, at least Trump did, Trump eventually recognized it as a crisis. Democrats were saying COVID was a crisis from the beginning. And what did Pelosi do? This was months after she tried to impeach the motherfucker. She whipped votes for 2 massive stimulus bills that had Trump's name on it. So it's like,
the PPP was under Trump, right? I think?
Right.
Yeah.
Correct. And American Heroes and CARES and stuff like that. So you can make the case that, listen, for all their faults, Democrats will whip votes to give a guy that they tried to impeach, that they hate, that they're running against in an election year, an electoral victory because it's what's best for the country. Whereas, to your point, a Republican authored bill by James Lankford, the second most conservative Republican in the Senate, won't go anywhere because Trump says, it's a wedge issue. And Lindsey Graham is also somebody else who explicitly said it as well. But anyway, I thought you did a really, really good job, but you did not enjoy it at all. Like this was.
I mean, when I watch him back, I think I'm kind of harsh on myself. It was probably fine, I guess. It just when my expectation is unrealistic. But like when I see people like this in my mind, nobody should be listening to this guy and thinking he's made almost any good points. Like everybody should universally be like, oh yeah, this guy was clearly a demagogue, clearly out of his depth, clearly not equipped or prepared or worthy even of this conversation. The fact that it's so divided feels insane to me. It's just wild.
What was if you could say you had a weak moment or your weakest, what was your weakest point in this debate?
I wish I remembered more specifically about the Minsk Accords. I hate that I let him push me around at all on Ukraine just because of that Ukraine family line. I should have attacked him for it. I think I should have made personal attacks against the fact that he says he has family members in Ukraine, but he wants to give up the country to Russians. I am really upset that I let him.
You're talking about the moderator there, Constantine, right?
Yeah. There's nothing to respond. Gorka, I don't know. Maybe just telling better stories or something. Oh, constructive. I could have focused more on constructivism. I think I should have provided more positive stuff in my favor. America would be better for this or that, maybe. It's something I've been trying to work on more. But doing something
more
of
an affirmative case for Biden, or is that what you mean?
Why make more of an affirmative case for my view of America? Because I think Trump's is very negative. I think, but
yeah. Well, like I said, dude, I think you killed it. The only other thing I'll point out is on Afghanistan, you were very strong on that too. But what's interesting is he brings up, which very few people talk about this. He's like, listen, we inked the Doha agreement, but it was conditions based, and this is something that. If you go back and check that Special Inspector General's report, which you mentioned, there were conditions. In theory, when Trump made the deal with Doha, the Taliban and Trump both imposed conditions on one another.
Mm-hmm.
We were never given a list of what those conditions are. It's just called 7 or 8 conditions. A couple of them are mentioned. One of them was don't shoot U.S. troops.
Sure.
That was the one condition that the Taliban honored. According to Mark Milley, according to General McKenzie, who was the operational commander for Afghanistan, the other 7 conditions were not met. So Trump did not enforce the conditions that he demanded of the Taliban, and Trump honored all of the demands that the Taliban made of him. So releasing 5,000 soldiers and stuff like that. So that's something else to mention.
But he would just say that, well, then Trump wouldn't have pulled our troops out. He would have just stayed there, I guess, forever.
Yeah, I suppose, but again, if you look at that Special Inspector General's report, there's evidence to the contrary that Trump was also basically making a date certain for May of 2021. But yeah, to your point, I suppose he could be like, well, that's true, but we were never going to pull out. He was eventually going to enforce it, and if he didn't, we would have never pulled out. But,
I wish I could. I don't know how to balance the thing. I want to force answers on some things, but the thing I get into is if I don't I feel like I have to ramble because they ramble, and the only way to counter ramble, I think, is ramble. But I wish I could force answers on individual things at points. Why did we abandon the Kurds in Syria that we fought alongside? I want to answer that. But I feel like if I just ask a question that simply, I would get another 5-minute yap, and then I could ask it again, and he'd get to yap so much more. I think he already spoke more than me in this debate, and it's
He did. Oh, also another good point was the attack on the bases that Iran's attacks on bases that.
Oh yeah, in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, where was our big response to that? We didn't do fuck all.
Yeah, and what was interesting was Constantine's response to that. He was like, "What's that have to do with anything?" Compared to, I think it was you were comparing it to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and your whole point was, well, that was a direct attack, and Trump didn't respond to it. So, why should Putin assume that if he attacks Ukraine, Trump would do anything about that? So I don't know. It definitely felt at times like a 2v1, which I kind of expected because the guy always struck me as a bit of a closet Trump supporter. But yeah. Anyway, you killed it. Are you going to have any more Republican debates or debates like this scheduled, or is that the last?
I don't know.
one?
It seems like after people talk to me, it seems like they get pretty ass mad and don't want to do it again. So I don't know. I feel like I'm running through most of these people, and I don't know if. Yeah,
what
I'm waiting.
peers?
Yeah, they asked me. I think I've gone on 2 or 3 or 4 times now. Yeah, they shoot me messages about stuff, so we'll see what that ends up looking like. If I imagine as the election comes up, more stuff is going to open up to me. So yeah, we'll say the election season looks. That's what we're kind of pulling back the slingshot for.
Yeah, awesome. All right, buddy. Well, listen, you have a good rest of your night. Okay.
Yep. I love you. Be careful.
All right. See ya. Love you. Bye.
Will you accept the election results of 2024, no matter what happens, Senator?
No matter what happens? No, if it's an unfair election, I think it's going to be contested by either side.
This is why people say you're overcombative. Not everyone is against you. Constantine is pro-Ukraine. Constantine's position, from what I've seen, is indistinguishable from the most ardently defensive Russian position. What is the difference between what's his name again? Hold on. Constantine. What's the difference between his position and the pro-Russia position? He even uses the same pro-Russia talking points. Edmund, thanks for the $20. What's the difference? There was a comment pointing out how he was wrong about the Minsk agreements. Oh, wait, was there? The moderator was factually wrong at multiple... Oh, that's an hour ago. Was factually wrong at multiple points of conversation. Misquoted Angela Merkel. Oh, this is a guy who's like watching my stream probably. The Minsk agreements collapsed in months. Signed 5th of December 2014. Collapsed January 2015.
Senator, no matter who wins, will you accept the election results of 2024, no matter what happens, Senator?
No matter what happens? No, if it's an unfair election, I think it's going to be contested by either side.
Senator, no matter who wins.
I think you're asking the wrong person. The Democrats are the ones that have opposed every Republican...
What a pussy-ass bitch. Answer the question. You un-American fuck.
...victory since 2000. Every single one. It's Hillary Clinton.
No Democrat has refused to concede. Hillary Clinton conceded. Senator, will you accept the election results?
Hillary Clinton said the election was stolen from her and that Trump was illegitimate. Kamala Harris agreed.
Senator,
we have Democrats now.
Senator, she conceded the election.
She said that Trump was illegitimate. She said that the election had been stolen. Kamala Harris agreed. By the way, there are Democrats serving in Congress today who in 2004 voted not to certify the Ohio electors because they said those machines had been tampered with. And you have Democrats now saying they won't certify 2024 because Trump is an insurrectionist.
Who said who? What?
Ineligible to hold office. So you need to ask them. I think you've had a... Have you ever asked the Democrat this question on your show? I bet you've never asked the Democrat that question.
Senator, you voted to certify the 2020 election, and here is what you said on that day that you voted to certify the 2020 election.
Yeah. Democracy is held together by people's confidence in the election and their willingness to abide by its results.
So by your own definition, are Donald Trump's claims undermining Americans' confidence in democracy, given that he has not conceded the last election, and he just said in recent days twice that he won Minnesota, Senator?
I think what undermines people's confidence in the election is when you have places like Wisconsin with over 500 illegal drop box locations, when you have places like
Just in time.
Georgia,
Thanks for $19.99 donation, buddy.
People $10 per vote. No, but listen, what undermines...
Offering 10 subs if you score 35,000. Okay, here we go. 35. Oh, no. Wait, play again? Will that give me a new game, or do I have to click new game? Will play again give me the same one? Oh, no. These are different. Okay.
It was hit 4 times.
Well, we have the great American statue of the Lady and the Lion. I'm very familiar with this. Who is this loser? Okay, we're either in DC or Rome. I have no fucking idea, guys. What the fuck is this? What the fuck is this? What are these people running from?
Previously on Serial.
It was a ticket out of jail card, basically. It's like, you can't put a person 50 years in prison and plus torture, right?
So when you are tortured by someone who doesn't believe in torture, how can this guy who believes in human rights doing this to me?
Well, it's exhausting because you're like pretending. Everything is pretend.
That's what I'm.
We're in a play and we're playing our part.
Everybody seems to think that the intelligence mission to Guantanamo was to build cases against these detainees for their continued detention. And I'm here to tell you that wasn't the friggin' mission.
From Serial Productions and the New York Times, this is Serial Season 4, Guantanamo. One prison camp told week by week. I'm Sarah Koenig, and this is our final episode. Every couple of weeks, at the bland hour of 5 p.m. on a Tuesday, a group of people you've never heard of clicks into a Zoom meeting. They're all family members of people who died on September 11th.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
There's Colleen, a nurse practitioner in the Bronx, and Terry, a retired documentary filmmaker in Boston, Diane in Savannah, a retired ordained minister, Valerie, who used to work in nonprofits, and her omnipresent feline.
Trying to get the cat's tail out of my face.
Barry, a graphic designer in Oregon.
Hey there.
Oh, Barry got a haircut.
And Phyllis in New York, a retired teacher who recently turned 80.
You are not 80.
I know, I'm not.
They've known each other a long time, many of them for a decade or more, through career changes and new grandchildren and health troubles.
Well, yeah. What would we do without each other, huh?
Yeah.
The first meeting I sat in on, June of 2022, I assumed they'd be like a support group. Instead, the topic that day was the physical and mental well-being of the 5 men accused of orchestrating the attacks that killed their relatives. If the men don't get the death penalty, and there's a very real possibility they won't, what should the men's punishment be?
I think, we're hearing that the 9/11 defendants don't want to leave Guantanamo.
No, because they think they're going to Florence, Colorado, which is very uncomfortable, or worse compared to Guantanamo.
Florence, Colorado is the site of a federal supermax prison. Unless you're a federal crime buff, I'm guessing you might not be able to name anyone incarcerated in Florence, Colorado. These guys can.
Moussaoui,
Hansen, Zernoff,
Kaczynski.
Ted Kaczynski.
That's Colleen. She tells the group she'd be fine with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged mastermind of 9/11, ending up in a place like Florence. She doesn't want him put to death or tortured, but solitary for the rest of his life would be okay with her. Valerie agrees. Others think Florence is too harsh.
It's awful. I think it's like being buried alive in a sense. You're underground 23 hours a day with the light on in your cell, and you get an hour outside if you behave. It's a really inhuman place.
It's very, very strict, yeah.
Everything about this call seemed upside down. That this group of people would care about a humane future for the 9/11 defendants. That the defendants might want to remain at Guantanamo. That the last people you'd think should be dealing with any of this end up dealing with all of this. And they weren't just doing a thought experiment here. Their positions matter. This group is called September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows, after Martin Luther King Jr. quote. Wars are poor chisels for carving out peaceful tomorrows. All the members are peaceniks. That's what brought the original members together in the first place. Their opposition to the U.S. bombing campaign in Afghanistan, a month after the September 11th attacks. Of the many family groups that formed after 9/11, this is the only one closely monitoring the trial of the 9/11 accused. The only one whose members traveled to every court session held for the case. Collectively, they've watched hundreds of hours of court proceedings, filed multiple amicus briefs,
out to come to you, they have to know you pretty good and like you. You know.
Well, yeah, how can a dog like me when people don't? Girls tonight. Yeah, you're looking pretty good tonight, pretty full. Yes, she's all right. Come along, my darling, heaven where we go. Come along, there, baby, please dance real slow. Back real slow. Come along, my darling. Heaven where we go. Come along, there, baby, please dance real slow. Back. Get behind me.
Shotgun up!
One thing I know that's worse than a bear. What's that? Wolverine.
I can't control you! Stay back!
Mom, I'm on top of a mountain. Ah, it's miserable up here. I'm running my guts out. My dog's so sore-footed he can't walk. My knee's all screwed up. And I mean, my horse is ribs and bones, Mother. It's impossible.
Come on, the darlings, everywhere we go. Sleep on day, sleep on day. Watch your step. Watch your step.
لم الزبالة يكون أمر كله في حاجة واحدة.
Quelle fraction de seconde? Le graphe. Après toi, Salomon.
They research deeply, stake out common sense but often unpopular positions, and lobby aggressively for those positions. And especially right then, spring of 2022, this group had some political juice. The 9/11 case was at a turning point. It had been in pretrial hearings for 10 years already. 10 years of waiting for someone to be held responsible for the deaths of their family members. And now a solution was maybe in sight. Peaceful Tomorrows had long pushed for this, for an ending. Liz, one of the younger members, tells the group she's a little conflicted. She's always been for closing Guantanamo. It's been one of the group's steadfast positions. Close it. But then she visited the base again recently, took in the whole clattering machine of the case, and now she's not sure. Maybe it does make more sense for the 9/11 defendants to serve out their sentences at Guantanamo, to not close down the facility.
It did make me question what closing it would mean and what all of this, like, what's next? What's next for us? What's next for the detainees, the attorneys, and what does justice look like for us, but what does justice also look like for them?
Yeah.
And something that I never even thought that I would sit there and think about. Like, I never in my life thought I would be concerned about like 5 people who were responsible for for doing what they did. I never thought that would happen.
Liz was 6 years old when her father, a firefighter, was killed at the World Trade Center. And now here she was, 27, working as a city council person in her hometown, planning her wedding on the side. And on the side, trying to think through one of the most morally and legally complex criminal cases in American history. Most aspects of Guantanamo can fairly be described as perverse. To wit, previous 8 episodes of this series. But the one thing that at least seemed logical about Guantanamo was the 9/11 trial. The idea of it was clear. We held in our custody the men we believed were behind the attacks that killed nearly 3,000 people in the United States. If anyone was our enemy at Guantanamo, it was these men. If any justice was to be had, it was through this trial. But remember how at the beginning of this series I said Guantanamo was the craziest criminal justice story we'd ever seen? The 9/11 case is largely what I had in mind. When I plot it out, it describes a knot so Gordian and a national psychology so convoluted. It changed my animating question about the trial, which used to be, how will it end? Now my question is, will it end, ever? Colleen Kelly, the nurse practitioner, was my main guide for the 9/11 trial. So to explain it to you, I'm going to stick with her. Colleen's brother, Bill Kelly, died on September 11th. He was 30 years old. He worked in finance, something E-Trade. Colleen never fully understood. But she used to visit his fancy Bloomberg office. He'd visit Colleen in the Bronx, play with his niece and nephews. On September 11th, Bill happened to be at the World Trade Center for a conference. So it took a few hours before the family figured out he was in the building. Around midnight, Colleen headed into Manhattan with a friend to look for Bill. And they performed the same impotent itinerary of hundreds of other family members in the shell-shocked city. Walking, emergency room to emergency room, Beth Israel, Bellevue, NYU. Finally, she said, all these families ended up in a big auditorium downtown where people's names would get called.
This is at 3 or 4 in the morning, and just to file, I don't know, a missing persons report? Like, we had to report, yeah. And
you did that? You met with somebody?
Yes, a female detective. I remember that.
Colleen and her parents and her siblings populated a sudden demographic, which eventually would squeeze into a military acronym, VFMs, Victim Family Members. They'd eventually get their own section of the airplane that flies down to Guantanamo, their own escorts and drivers on the base, their own curtained-off seating area inside the gallery of the military court, their own press conferences. All that was years away. In the moment, right after the attack, Colleen tried to find out what happened to her brother. Not the general outlines. She had to know exactly what happened.
I became obsessed with understanding his last day. Oh, really? I want to know what my brother was thinking when he was trapped on the 106th floor. I want to understand, was he panicked? Was he okay? Was he hopeful? What was he thinking? Like, it became very, very important to me. Like, give me everything. Give me everything right now. Like, I want to know I don't know if Bill jumped. I believe he did. I became obsessed with that question in the fall of 2001.
She went about answering that question methodically, like a detective. Several weeks after 9/11, Colleen's family found out that Bill had sent BlackBerry messages to his boss at Bloomberg after the plane hit the North Tower. The last message Colleen saw was from 9:23 a.m. There was a whole hour to go. The North Tower didn't collapse until 10:28. Colleen fixated on that last hour, on Bill's last minutes. Bloomberg also gave Colleen's family photos of Bill from that morning at Windows on the World. It turned out they'd hired a photographer for the event, who'd left just before the building was hit. Colleen spoke with the photographer, studied her pictures. In one of them, Bill's talking with a man Colleen didn't recognize, receding hairline, glasses. That spring, the New York Times published a big story, a TikTok of the final 102 minutes of the towers. Colleen examined the grainy, zoomed-in shot of people teeming at the blown-out windows. In one of them, she thought she recognized Bill. So Colleen contacted that photographer, went to his studio in Lower Manhattan. He gave her an enlarged print to take home. She stared at it. Yes, it looks like Bill, she thought. He's at an open window. She sees the back of his head. His arm is reaching across the vertical window frame, reaching out to another man, receding hairline, like the guy from the Bloomberg photo. Maybe Bill knew him. They're holding on to each other's arms. This photo is partly why Colleen thinks Bill jumped. Also, they never found any remains of her brother, while other bodies were recovered from the 106th floor. Eventually, Colleen was able, as she says, to let go. She realized excavating Bill's last minutes was her way of trying to take away some of the pain and fear her brother must have felt, a way to absorb it into herself, which was impossible. The energy Colleen put into tracking Bill's last hour, that ferocity for uncovering information, and that fealty to facts, no matter how distressing, now multiply that 1,000-fold. And that's what Colleen has dedicated to the 9/11 trial. She's been to Guantanamo well over a dozen times. If she can't watch the trial in person, she'll sometimes go to a remote viewing station at Fort Hamilton, an Army base near the Verrazano Bridge in Brooklyn. When hearings aren't in session, which is most of the time, she calls up experts and attorneys to ask questions and talk strategy. Before I knew better, I'd thought the actual trial of the 9/11 accused might not matter all that much to Colleen. 5 men languishing at Guantanamo, imprisoned for 20 years already, unlikely to ever be free. Why would a trial affect Colleen's life? Her busy life, by the way. She set me straight. She did care.
Oh my God, yes. Yeah. Hugely. Because, if Bill was killed on a street corner in Manhattan where he lived, of course I would be at that trial every day when it came to a trial. It's like you want to know all the facts. You want to know how this happened, who this person was, what went on, and have people be held accountable. So yes, I was always really, really interested both in the trial as a form of accountability, but also what the? This sounds ridiculous that I'm saying this to you right now, 22 years later. No one knows, how did Khalid Sheikh Mohammed do what he did? How did the hijackers get their money? How did they get on planes? Who knew what, when, how? How are all these other guys, the other 4 men, how are they involved? I don't know what they did. He was the money guy. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. Like, money to do what? Did you know what they were doing with the money? To me, like, that's the hardest piece of this is it comes back to the evidence. Like, what is the evidence against these other 4 men? I really don't know. Mm-hmm. So I'm intensely, obsessively wanting to know how this all happened and why.
Don't you feel like you know why they did it?
No. I've been told by people who are not the 5 accused why they did it. No, I don't know why they did it.
So you need to hear it from them.
Yeah. It's just, it's what I need. It's what I need.
Keep in mind, Colleen has looked at everything she can get her hands on about how and why 9/11 happened. Government reports, statements by the 9/11 accused, books by prominent journalists. Most extraordinary to me, she spent years visiting a former member of the militant group Weather Underground in prison. She wanted to know what it felt like when your belief system carried you past natural boundaries to extreme violence. But none of it satisfied her. In this case, Colleen needs primary sources. She needs specific answers that are still locked inside these specific defendants. The trial would unlock them. That's what trials are for. The military commissions at Guantanamo were supposed to be our Nuremberg trials, when the Allied powers prosecuted Nazis and German leaders immediately following the Second World War. The Nuremberg trials were huge, efficient, and by many measures, successful. They didn't fix the world, but they at least held racists and murderers to account, helped repair a broken continent, and reset a common morality that said war crimes, no matter how chaotic or horrific, would be adjudicated in a civilized court of law for all the world to see. It's no wonder, then, that photos of the Nuremberg trial hung on the wall at the prosecution offices of the military commissions. Oh, whoa. What is that? On Colleen Kelly's wall hung a handmade primer explaining the military commissions, the opposite of the Nuremberg trials in terms of efficiency and success.
This is the weirdness.
Wait, what? Just explain what I'm looking at. Behind her bedroom door was a waterfall of paper, giant presentation-sized sheets describing this special court, created to try a handful of Guantanamo prisoners we charged with terrorism or war crimes. The 9/11 case was meant to be the main event.
This is really helpful because we all forget about the charges against the 9/11 accused.
This document was for an explainer she did years ago, but Colleen was keeping it here because so much time had passed since the 9/11 criminal case started, she sometimes forgets the basics. Also, I suspect, because the case has emulsified into her waking life, so that she hardly noticed that an enormous handwritten record of judicial disappointment occupied physical and mental real estate in her bedroom, spitting distance from her pillow while she slept.
That's not good.
You can age this document by the judge Colleen listed on one of the sheets, Judge Pohl. He lasted the first 6 years, until 2018. Then came Judge Perella, who left after 9 months. Then Judge Cohen came in, pledging continuity, so important in a case of this magnitude. Less than a year later, Cohen retired. Then Judge Watkins stepped in temporarily until Judge Keene came aboard. Judge Keene lasted 2 weeks. He had conflicts. Then Judge McCall, but McCall had been a judge for less than 2 years, which was against the rules, so Judge Watkins stepped in temporarily again. Then Judge Acosta babysat the case for a minute until Judge McCall came back once he had 2 years' experience under his belt. Judge McCall is the current judge on the 9/11 case. He's announced he might or might not be retiring at the end of this year. I know you're not following this. That's the problem. No one can follow this.
like no joke, on January 1st, I saw some friends that I haven't seen in a long time, and they know that I'm very active in this work. And they asked kind of what's going on. And I started to explain, and I see this is a guy who's a lawyer, and he's really smart, and he's really engaged on issues of great importance around the globe. And I just see, like, after a while, just glazes over. Yeah, I was kind of bummed out.
Do you get the sense they don't believe you? Like they think you must not understand what's happening because it can't be that bad? Or literally it's just too complicated?
It's too complicated. It's too complicated. Because if you start to say something, you say a sentence, you realize you have to say another sentence to explain it. Because there is no elevator pitch for this.
No elevator pitch, okay. But how about we take the stairs, you and me, all the way to the top. And you lend me those, 7 minutes, and I'll spin you through this fakakta case in this fakakta court, so you can understand the bind the 9/11 case is in right now. After we captured the 5 defendants, the men we believed plotted and carried out the 9/11 attacks, we held them in CIA custody, in black sites around the world, and we tortured them. After 3-4 years, we sent them to Guantanamo in September of 2006. A couple of false starts later, including a politically disastrous effort to bring the case to federal court in Manhattan, the men eventually were arraigned in May of 2012 at a military commission in Guantanamo Bay. The 5 defendants were Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Walid bin Attash, Ramzi bin al-Sheba, Ammar al-Baluchi, and Mustafa al-Hawsawi. In the courtroom, they would each sit in a different row, one behind the other, in the order they appear on the charge sheet, KSM to Hawsawi. So, how is this court different from all other courts? And why doesn't it work? Any normal lawyer hearing what I'm about to lay out here is probably going to be horrified or else think I must be mistaken. I am not mistaken. Here we go. In normal criminal court, a defendant has a constitutional right to confront his accuser. So if I accuse you of assault, say, I have to come to court, take an oath, and testify in front of a judge or jury. In the military commissions, they'll entertain a jacked-up form of hearsay evidence, which means an FBI agent can take the stand and say, years ago, I went to a police station in Yemen, and a Yemeni cop brought me some witnesses he had already interrogated, and I talked to all of them and I wrote down what they told me. But those original Yemeni witnesses don't have to be called in, or take an oath, or answer any questions, because the agents who spoke with them don't even know how to find them anymore. The Yemeni's second-hand statements, made through an interpreter, mind you, can be allowed as evidence in the war court at Guantanamo. And these aren't any old criminal cases. These are capital cases, death penalty cases. As one former military defense attorney said to me, allowing that kind of hearsay, quote, that would happen nowhere else. That's absolutely insane, unquote. Also, torture. Statements derived from torture or cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment cannot be used in federal court, period. But in the military commissions, it's mushier. Something I said while I was being tortured, you can't use that in an actual trial. But it's still in dispute whether the government could use my torture-derived statements in pretrial hearings, or use something my neighbor said about me while he was being tortured. And this is the central issue now, they might be able to use at trial statements I made after I was tortured. Also, all the classified stuff. It is mind-boggling, the profusion and confusion over what is classified. In the military commissions, the accused isn't allowed to see all the evidence against him because classified, a ton of it. Even the classification guidelines for the military commissions are themselves classified. The defense can't see them all. And it's not just documents the defense can't see. A large number of potential witnesses, people who worked in black sites, say, their identities are classified. The defense can't call them because they can't identify them. And if they do happen to know the name of a CIA employee, current or former, they aren't allowed to contact them directly. So those are some of the baked-in problems. Now to the weirder stuff. The cases from the outset have continuously fended off, let's call it interference, intrusion, infiltration, spying, basically. The first big incident that made the news was in 2013, just as the case was getting underway. The kill button incident. One Monday afternoon in court, a lawyer for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was talking about evidence from CIA black sites, and when he said the word secret, the CCTV feed from the courtroom cut off, meaning anyone watching from the spectators' gallery or remotely suddenly heard nothing. White noise filled the speakers. The judge and the security officer sitting to his right, they do have the ability to cut the feed to avoid classified spills. But in this instance, the judge hadn't pressed the button, and neither had the security officer. Someone else, some external body, had cut the feed, and the judge didn't know who, and he was pissed. All kinds of questions erupted then. Who was listening in? What else could they hear? Was this the CIA? Did the CIA just drown out information it didn't want anyone talking about? Who was in charge of this thing? Who was really in charge? The kill button was only the beginning. In attorney-client meeting rooms, spaces that are supposed to be sacrosanct, they'd find hidden mics in the shape of phony smoke detectors or else hidden in the walls. The FBI would pry inside a defense team, in one instance turning a defense staffer into an informant. An interpreter assigned to the defense seemed to have had a previous job at a CIA black site. So who was he really working for? All this bugging and snooping, it was hard not to conclude, was an effort to undermine the cases, to keep evidence and documentation of what happened to the men in black sites from becoming public. This is what the CIA feared, and still fears. Secrets of the torture program becoming public. The CIA didn't offer any comment about this when I contacted them. Torture has infected almost every aspect of the military commission's cases. It's why so much of the discovery is classified or not available at all. It's why the men's physical and mental health is a constant topic. It's why fighting over admissibility of evidence in the 9/11 case is epic. It's why delays and breakdowns in the proceedings are legion. Every one of these problems, the kill button, the hidden mics, the classification arguments, the medical issues, and countless, frequently ridiculous others that I do not have time in our journey here to name, all of it has involved litigation that causes months or half a year or several years of delays. And that is how a case which could have been, I don't know about a slam dunk, but vastly easier, surely. Remember, KSM has admitted planning 9/11. But this case is now entering its 13th year of pretrial hearings. Finally, last thing, I promise, appeals. Many, many legal experts who've looked at the 9/11 case agree that a verdict in this case cannot survive appeal, which likely eventually would end up in the Supreme Court. In a statement to lawmakers, a Marine brigadier general who served as chief defense counsel for the commissions wrote that the myriad defects mean that, quote, there are literally so many significant grounds for potential reversible error that it is impossible to list them all, unquote. And appeals, of course, take their own sweet time. The appeals could add another decade to this case, easily. Another attorney told me in a moment of relaxed crankiness that at the rate his case was going, it was actually possible his client's appellate attorney hadn't been born yet. So for family members of victims of the 9/11 attacks, watching the military commissions has been like trailing a mirage. You can hear their mounting disillusion in the VFM press conferences from Guantanamo over the years. At first, a lot of them, they thought it could work.
I'm very honored to be here and see how our justice system works and the transparency, because the world needs to see that.
That's from a press conference in 2012 when the 9/11 defendants were arraigned. 2 years later, you hear people start losing their patience.
If we could feel we were moving somehow forward towards a resolution.
This woman talked about how she'd been down in Guantanamo once before, in 2009, and watched a mental competency hearing for one of the 9/11 defendants, Ramzi bin al-Sheba. Now it was 2014, and she was back, watching a mental competency hearing for one of the 9/11 defendants, Ramzi bin al-Sheba.
But here we are standing in place since 2009 to 2014, 5 years standing in place, and it's painful. But I see there is...
By 2017, you hear desperation.
And I don't think this is going to be resolved in my lifetime. And that's really what I have to say. And it may sound negative, but I'm not negative with anybody here or any of the people here. It's just that I want justice done, and I can't see light at the end of the tunnel yet. Okay, I know.
After 2017, prosecutors stopped meeting with the media. For Peaceful Tomorrow's members, Colleen told me 2017 was also the year they realized, oh, this is never going to work.
We've had it. Like, now we've had it. It's endless. There's always something, and there's always going to be something. That's when it's like plea deals.
Plea deals. The prosecution was still insisting they could get this trial done, get guilty verdicts against the 9/11 defendants. But Colleen and Terry and the group members had lost faith. They could see clearly now. The military commission system was a failure. Forget about a trial. The only logical solution to ending this thing, to getting a conviction that would stick, to getting the answers they wanted, plea deals. Anyone could see that plea deals were the way to go, right? That's after the break.
I'm Julie Turkowitz. I'm a reporter at the New York Times. To understand changes in migration, I traveled to the Darien Gap. Thousands have been risking their lives to pass through the border of Colombia and Panama in the hopes of making it to the United States. We interviewed hundreds of people to try and grasp what's making them go to these lengths. New York Times journalists spend time in these places to help you understand what's really happening there. You can support this kind of journalism by subscribing to the New York Times.
The idea of a plea agreement was that if the government took the death penalty off the table, maybe the 9/11 defendants would plead guilty and give up their right to appeal. The case would be over. The plea would include an extensive, likely months-long sentencing hearing, almost like its own trial. And such a hearing would include a stipulation of fact. This was key to Colleen, a stipulation of fact, a narrative, in which each defendant would explain with precision exactly what they had done to make 9/11 happen and exactly why they had done it. And that's how, through a plea deal, Colleen could get the answers she needed. But a plea deal in the 9/11 case, for a lot of people, that's a tough sell because it's the 9/11 case. It's emotional, and a plea deal sounds wrong, like the government's giving up or just doesn't care anymore. And no death penalty for the people responsible for 9/11? Why would anyone ever make a deal with these guys? That is an understandable response, especially if you have no idea how dysfunctional the court is. And let's face it, very few people have clocked the ins and outs of the 9/11 case, including most politicians. While President Trump was in office, a plea deal in the 9/11 case was a non-starter. Come 2021, though, a few remarkable things happened to shake up the military commissions. First, the long-serving and forceful chief prosecutor, a general who'd been committed to a death penalty trial, announced he was retiring. His replacement, Colleen thought, might be more amenable to a plea. Then came the sentencing hearing of Majid Khan. The military jurors' response to hearing Majid Khan talk about being tortured, their recommendation for clemency, offered a clue as to how the jurors might react to the torture of the 9/11 defendants, one of whom, as a result of being sodomized in CIA custody, has to sit on a cushioned chair in court and eventually underwent rectal repair surgery. In other words, even if prosecutors got a conviction at trial, they might not get a death sentence.
As one judge after another has been replaced.
Soon after Majid Khan's sentencing, the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing titled Closing Guantanamo. The only victim family member who testified was Colleen. Her message was strong and sad. Family members who wanted and needed this trial to happen, she said, had already waited too long.
In May of 2012, I sat with my dear friend Rita Lassar watching the arraignment of the 9/11 accused. Rita's brother Abe died when he stayed behind to assist a disabled coworker on the 27th floor of the North Tower. Rita is now deceased. In 2017, I was on the plane to Guantanamo with Lee Hansen, the only 9/11 family member to be deposed in the pretrial hearings. Lee Hansen lost his son, his daughter-in-law, and his granddaughter on Flight 175. Mr. Hansen is now deceased. In 2019, I was on a boat crossing Guantanamo Bay with Alice Hoagland, mother of Flight 93 hero
Mark Bingham. Alice Hoagland is now deceased.
Colleen and her cohort had always been the hippie 9/11 group. Anti-war, anti-violence, anti-Guantanamo. In the world of victims' family members, their views were squarely in the minority. But now, 2 decades later, it seemed the national mood had shifted. Vengefulness had dimmed. And Colleen was invited to the table. 5 other people testified as well, non-hippies, conservatives, a couple people who'd been Guantanamo boosters back in the day, who'd helped design detainee policy and the military commissions under President Bush. And now, nobody was arguing. Plea deals. It's the only way.
Guantanamo Bay. I thank you again for your invitation and for your time and attention.
Thank you, General.
A few months after the Senate hearing, in March of 2022, the newspaper announced prosecutors and defense attorneys were in talks. They were negotiating a plea deal in the 9/11 case. Finally. That same spring is when I started listening in on the Peaceful Tomorrow Zoom meetings. Colleen and the rest of the group knew a plea agreement and sentencing would take some time. One attorney on the case estimated 18 months. Their strategy was to stay cool, which the lawyers negotiating the deal had also recommended. Yes, the plea talks had been in the papers, the news was out there, but still they decided, let's not make a lot of noise, no big public push. The risk of riling up opposition was too great. This thing was so fragile politically, even minor blowback could snuff it out. So they'd lie low. The meetings, though, were animated. The group worked on a list of questions they wanted the defendants to answer in the event of a sentencing. Questions some of them have harbored since 2001.
Who knew that there were 20 hijackers and how they were getting their tickets?
They want to know, who was the financial mastermind? Was it KSM's nephew, Amar al-Baluchi?
Did he communicate to so-and-so that he was making this transaction? Is that maybe what you're more after?
And what were they told about why the transaction was made?
The finances are a big topic with this group, not only because they want to understand the inner workings of the plot, but because they want to understand the relative guilt of the 5 defendants. Is Amar al-Baluchi less culpable than his uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, but more culpable than Mustafa al-Hawsawi? They passed their questions along to a defense attorney working on the 9/11 case. A defense attorney. At first, this surprised me, but they were talking to defense attorneys as much, if not more, than they were talking to prosecutors. And then they waited. 6 months passed, 8 months. By December, 9 months since the plea negotiations started, everyone was getting antsy.
So boy, this is beyond any kind of advocacy I've ever done before.
Hearings in the 9/11 case were on hold while the prosecution and defense tried to work it out. They were supposed to agree on so-called policy principles by now, which is a dry term, but it was the meat of the deal. If the men pleaded guilty, what would they get in return? The policy principles mostly had to do with the conditions of the men's imprisonment. They wanted assurances that as long as they were in prison, they'd have a communal situation like they have now, the ability to eat together and pray together, no solitary confinement. Also, they wanted proper, sustained treatment for their physical and psychological trauma caused by the torture, and the ability to communicate better with their families. For the plea to progress, the prosecution needed an answer from the Biden administration, whether they supported the policy principles. But Biden wasn't saying anything at all. In the Peaceful Tomorrow Zoom calls, people started asking, what should we do? Should we stomp our feet? Terry reminded everyone, the lead attorney for Amar al-Baluchi, Jay Cannell, he was still advising, no.
Because he thinks it's going to take the time it takes, and we could mess it up. So I'm just really keenly aware of how little negative press plea deals have gotten and how much I don't want to generate negative press.
The 1-year mark came and went. Now it was March of 2023. Still nothing. Valerie's cat was dying.
When you pet him, you have to be so careful because he's all bones, you know?
Liz's wedding was off. She was now running for mayor. Phyllis suggested maybe they take a breather, get some distance from all the discouragement. Jay Cannell came to a meeting to give an update, which was no update on the deal, really. But he did have something to tell them.
So I have now seen a draft of the proposed stipulation of facts.
and it is extensive. It is 200 pages long.
That's the document Colleen and the others are waiting for, the main thing they want from this plea. In the 200-page statement, Jay's client, Amar al-Baluchi, had laid out his background, how he ended up in this situation at such a young age. Then he talks about 9/11.
It's really a deep examination of who exactly did what in the plot around 9/11. I mean, and it's very detailed on that point.
Finally, there's a section about what happened to him in prison.
So, this 200-page document really dives deep into, I think, basically any question that anyone would have.
Liz has a holy shit look on her face. Later, she told me that's what she was feeling. Holy shit, this information is out there. And why do we not have it? One of the 5 defendants had answered their questions in a document they couldn't see. Not yet. Not unless there was a plea. But it was something. And then, August of last year.
I haven't talked in a little while, so my throat's a little bit croaky. I shoot almost exclusively ambient, but I'm going to probably need to change that up soon enough. We've sort of been spoiled here in parts of Australia and especially parts of Queensland where I am, where that has been relatively on trend. Even sometimes that sort of very flat, dull, muddy light has even been on trend, believe it or not. Meaning we can sort of get away with the ambient light. But there is starting to be a notable qualitative difference between photographers who shoot with artificial light. What am I doing? With like really good flash and really good soft boxes and stuff like that. There's starting to be a pretty noticeable difference between those guys and the guys who are just shooting exclusively ambient light. So I'm giving some very serious thought to doing a little bit more ambient. Sorry, I'm so bad at talking while I'm editing. I almost exclusively shoot ambient light. Just about everything you've seen today or everything you've sort of seen from me for the past 6 months has been ambient, but that's only because the industry, especially around where I am, has leaned towards ambient light and away from telltale signs of sort of artificial stuff. No, don't worry about asking questions. This is something I need practice on. Is editing whilst I talk. But it's sort of, and you could say that pretty broadly across Australia, that there has been a lot more emphasis put on natural light sort of photography, and I think that started to even influence the world a little bit because of outlets like the Local Project and what have you. But like anything, a trend gets absolutely done to death, and then it sort of starts to swing in the other direction, which is probably what's happening now. But add to the fact that in Australia, that natural light there was a big emphasis on it. But then where I am in Queensland, there's like twofold emphasis put on it, where people want sort of like those pretty harsh lines and like that aggressive sunlight you might sort of see through a photo, the sort of thing that you would see in Andy McPherson's work. A lot of the houses here built in my sort of vicinity. Man, there's something happening with my Zoom. And I think it's to do with my tablet. Andy McPherson's like really good at emphasizing the relationship between the house and the way that it's sort of built in association with the maybe it's Windows Ink that's the problem. That's a little bit better. Yeah, that's what I would say. That's what I would say. That's me. Oh my goodness, that's me you can see in there. How embarrassing. I've needed to go to the toilet for like the past 20 minutes. So I'm probably gonna go do that in 2 secs. Once I figure out if I can even remove myself. Drum roll.
Year, the public suddenly woke up. It was the government who woke them, not peaceful tomorrows. The prosecution sent a letter to 9/11 victim family members, to a much wider group than usual, some of whom hadn't been contacted about this case in forever, letting them know the plea negotiations were happening and seeking their opinions or concerns. And oh man, did they need an editor for this letter. Robotically matter-of-fact, lousy with acronyms. Sure enough, nearly a year and a half after the plea negotiations had first been reported, a whole new crop of people did have opinions and concerns. They called the prosecution office. They called the press. They called Capitol Hill. The AP ran a story. Plea negotiations could mean no 9/11 defendants face the death penalty, the U.S. tells families. Conservatives made immediate hay. Ted Cruz took to his podcast.
This story is absolutely outrageous, and I think everyone hearing it should be shocked and should be furious.
Family members expressed outrage on TV.
I feel like the Biden administration should order them not to accept this plea deal. The 9/11
More than 2,000 victim family members wrote an open letter to the president, protesting the plea deal. Peaceful Tomorrow's members were feeling like, if they could just gather all the family members in the same room and explain everything they knew about how broken the military commissions were, maybe the others would see they were never going to get a trial or the death penalty. If they wanted answers or any shred of accountability, a plea deal was the best they could hope for. Within a couple of weeks, President Biden broke his silence regarding the plea deals. Well, he never said anything publicly, but a line in a prosecution court filing said the Biden administration declined the so-called policy principles. Biden was not on board. He would not support an assurance of no solitary confinement or an assurance of torture rehabilitation. For the past year and a half, no one had seemed clear on what role the White House was playing in these unprecedented plea negotiations, in this unprecedented criminal case, in this unprecedented court. Maybe the president really disagreed with the terms of the deal. Or maybe in September of 2023, it just came down to realpolitik. He's coming up on an election. And perhaps the mother of all bad Guantanamo headlines is the one that says you're negotiating sleeping arrangements and therapy with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the man who claimed to have beheaded Daniel Pearl and orchestrated the most devastating terror attack in modern history. So, I kept thinking about Colleen. How on earth did she have the stamina for this? I would have given up years ago, probably a decade ago. Found some way to talk myself out of caring anymore. I'd asked her, was that the hardest part? Just staying with it?
No. Because I'm so stubborn. Seriously, being stubborn. Like, I am not gonna let their failure be mine as well. I'm sticking with this. I'm not giving up until this ends some way, somehow. I'm not giving up.
And so, Colleen headed down to Guantanamo. That's after the break. Because of the plea negotiations, and before that, COVID, the 9/11 case hadn't seen much court action since 2019. Now, September of 2023, the whole enterprise cranked back up again. For the 9/11 case, that's 5 teams of roughly 20 people per team, lawyers and interpreters and analysts, then the judge and his staff, plus observers and reporters and their minders and escorts, maybe 150 people heaving themselves to Cuba, including Colleen. I traveled alongside Colleen. She hadn't been to Guantanamo for 3.5 years. She was in a brighter mood than I expected. At the hotel, she joked that the complimentary laundry pods in her room might be listening devices.
Maybe that's a secret listening device.
That would be really funny.
It would be all thrown in the washer, and that's what activates it to send the.
I didn't see Colleen all that much during the week. At Guantanamo, the VFMs are closely guarded and protected, mostly in an effort to keep media away from them. So it felt almost illegal to seek her out. In the courtroom gallery, we'd nod to each other self-consciously as I walked by the VFM section to get to my seat. It was a strange split-screen experience to watch this pretrial hearing, knowing, or at least strongly believing, none of this is leading to an actual verdict. But also, it's court, so it's interesting. People arguing passionately about secrecy and the Constitution, witnesses testifying nervously or testily. Within the larger narrative of inaction, there's a lot of action. This week's hearing, they were dealing with the crux of the case, whether statements the defendants made in 2007, after they got to Guantanamo and were no longer in CIA custody, whether those statements could be used as evidence at trial. The statements, which are critical to the prosecution, are known as the clean team statements, since they were taken by teams of government investigators who were not CIA and were not, the government argues, using any form of coercion. The defense wants the clean team statements thrown out, arguing, among other reasons, that they are tainted, a backdoor way for torture-derived evidence to enter the trial, and that the interviews were not truly voluntary, not to mention that the men were never sufficiently informed of their rights in these interviews or allowed a lawyer. The fight over whether to suppress these statements has been going on, you'll be shocked to learn, for many years in many different forms. The week we were there, the excitement was that former FBI agent Frank Pellegrino was going to be testifying, the agent who took a clean statement from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed at Guantanamo. He'd been after KSM for years, prior to September 11th, probably knew more about him than anyone in law enforcement. Pellegrino's testimony seemed great for the prosecution. He came across as credible, said KSM answered his questions voluntarily, that he even cracked a joke or two. But Pellegrino also seemed restive with anger at the position the CIA had put him and other FBI agents in because of the black sites. Prior to September 11th, probably knew more about him than anyone in law enforcement. Pellegrino's testimony seemed great for the prosecution. He came across as credible, said KSM answered his questions voluntarily, that he even cracked a joke or two. But Pellegrino also seemed restive with anger at the position the CIA had put him and other FBI agents in because of the black sites and the torture. Under questioning, Pellegrino said, quote, "I think that the whole thing from the beginning was a flaming bag of crap that we got stuck with," unquote. One defense attorney told me it was the first time a witness had said something so plainly critical of the torture program since the proceedings began a dozen years ago. A couple other significant things had happened too, hugely significant. The week before, the judge had severed Ramzi bin al-Sheba from the 9/11 case, deciding after about a decade of litigation that he was mentally incompetent to aid in his own defense. Ramzi bin al-Sheba is generally considered the second most culpable of the 5 defendants, sort of like KSM's deputy. The other major news was that a month earlier, a judge in the other death penalty case before the military commissions against the Saudi man accused of orchestrating the deadly bombing of the USS Cole in 2000, that judge threw out the clean team statements in the Cole case, saying they were tainted by torture. These developments seemed to me to point in the direction of plea deals. The 9/11 case seemed like it was disintegrating. I'd come down to Guantanamo thinking the plea deals were dead, but everyone was saying they're not. Really, they're not. We just have to find a different way to get them done. Jay Cannell told reporters the plea deals are sleeping, not in a coma, sleeping.
Right now, the Feels like temperature, which I think is accurate, is 98 degrees.
Most evenings, a bunch of us reporters hang out on outdoor couches in the hotel's courtyard.
We're done.
Contract workers often sit at the tables nearby, everybody drinking, while the leggy stray cats of Guantanamo dart around the edges of the patio. Carol Rosenberg sometimes feeds them her leftovers. Colleen came to join us a couple times to talk about the case and also to reminisce.
It was the really bad flight.
I recall from...
She's known most of these reporters for years. She was with a few of them on a flight so notoriously terrifying that people still talk about it. John Ryan was on that flight. So was Carol.
Well, I don't know what you were doing, but you were doing something. You were scared shitless.
Yeah.
Also Terry McDermott, a former investigative reporter for the LA Times, who now writes books, including The Hunt for KSM, which Colleen has read. He was on that flight, and he's back here now.
I had taken a lot of Ativan, and I went and sat next to you and said,
You came up to embarrass yourself.
I did.
Yeah.
I'm like, tell me everything you know about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And I took like 3 sentences of notes, and then I trailed off, I guess. I don't know.
What's up?
I'm not a war reporter, but I imagine this is sort of what it's like after hours, minus the danger. People thrown together trying to make sense of a protracted battle. The so-called war on terror has been enormous, global, and yet sitting here, it can feel like the whole thing is funneled down to this small clutch of people. Reporters, victims, attorneys, soldiers, drinking in the courtyard of the Navy Gateway Inn and Suites. We start talking about how this case ends. Plea deals, John Ryan says, 100%. Terry agrees, there's never going to be a trial. Carol thinks maybe an abatement could happen, that at some point the judge might say, okay, government, if you won't produce CIA witnesses, then I'm going to pull the plug. Everybody go home until you're ready to make this a fair trial, which could mean no resolution at all. One night, Jay Cannell, the defense attorney, turns up. He's wearing shorts and sandals, a brace on his ankle from an injury sustained in spin class. He grabs a club soda. I ask him, all these things that are happening, the decision to sever Ramzi Ben Al-Sheba, the USS Cole judge's ruling on the clean team statements, the flaming pile of crap. Does it feel like this case might be crumbling in the defense's favor? He says, look, I know you've been down here before.
And there's this temptation to feel like I've come at a pivotal moment and something important is happening. But this is our 47th hearing. And they've all felt like that. I always feel like if it were a boxing match, we'd have won every round on points. But what does that matter? There's no tallying up of points. There's no points. And so, we'll come back in November, and then we'll come back again in February, and we'll come back and back and back and back.
Jay's been on this case full-time since 2011. He's the one who used to make predictions. It'll take 4 years to get to trial, he said at the beginning. Okay, 5 years. In 2018, he stopped timestamping. The most he'll say now is that we're in the middle of the case. The middle. How long the middle lasts, anyone's guess. At least a couple more years, maybe longer. Jay believes in the rightness of his mission, that the U.S. government's power cannot go unchecked or trample human rights. He tries not to get caught up in what should happen or could happen. He says he's going to stick with this case as long as it takes. But for a minute there, he really thought this thing might end, that the plea deals would materialize, maybe by the end of 2022. He started planning his next move, entertainment law. He wants to work in the music industry. Even ordered slick new business cards, the kind that feel like a credit card.
Do you ever get the sense that the prosecution feels exactly the same way you guys do on the defense side? That everyone is just like, we're locked in this, like, falling apart train that just keeps going?
In dark moments, I feel like I'm a puppet in a revenge fantasy where somebody 15 years ago decided that they were going to put on this show about getting the death penalty against these men, knowing that the military doesn't really execute people. The military hasn't executed anyone since 1961.
And that, they needed actors for their right. They need to put people in place. They need to put defense attorneys in place, prosecutors in place, judge in place. I don't always feel that way, but sometimes it feels like that. And I could entirely imagine that the prosecution would feel like that they are, put up there to represent the forces of revenge, and that we're put up there to represent the forces of the rule of law, and that there's just kind of a play that happens.
The prosecutors weren't permitted to discuss the case with me on the record, so I can't say whether they share Jay's revenge fantasy feeling. But the prosecution were the ones who initiated the plea negotiations 2 years ago, as the road to trial was getting only longer and darker. They want this show over too. Toward the end of the week, I checked in with Colleen one last time. She'd been up since 3 a.m., she said. Her mind had been churning. So she said she wrote it all down to get her thoughts outside her body. She'd underestimated how sad this trip was for her.
I never cried on here. I mean, this was like the third time I cried down here. I don't usually cry down here. And I'm not saying that's like good or bad, just is what it is. This trip was really emotional.
I'd seen some of that earlier in the week. Within 24 hours of our arrival, I'd gone to find her in her hotel room, a couple floors below mine. She was falling apart a little, missing her brother, worried she couldn't remember his voice anymore. And also just being down here again, watching this case rattle back to life.
I think I've pinned a lot of my hope for accountability and getting to the bottom of this on some kind of legal process, because, it just feels like, Jesus, he was murdered. Somebody, be responsible for that.
This side of Colleen I wasn't familiar with. I'd seen only confident, rigorous, determined Colleen, but never Colleen in despair.
I feel like I've said this 20,000 times, but I'm really feeling this now. I don't know that this is ever going to happen. I don't know that there will ever be a trial. I've never questioned it as strongly as I am now.
Waiting 20 years for a trial doesn't just deny Colleen answers. Year after year after year, it prolongs her grief, makes dealing with her brother's death harder, if such a thing is possible. By the end of the week, Colleen was more collected. She told me the VFMs had met with the defense the night before. She cried a lot at that meeting, too, she said. Like Jay Cannell, she knows better than to get her hopes up, but she realized she'd gotten her hopes up about a plea deal. The lawyers had talked about how close they'd come, really kind of close to a deal. In the meeting, Colleen had aired her most cynical and, she worries, possibly her most realistic analysis of how this all ends, which is nothing. No trial, no plea deal, no ending. And that nothingness, that is the plan. A plan that would serve the interests of some powerful stakeholders, namely the CIA, which would never have to reveal the identities of the people who conducted and enabled torture, or the countries where it all happened. Also, the detainees, who could quietly stay here at Guantanamo in the communal confinement they want, presumed innocent until they die, forgotten. The politicians who could keep kicking this toxic can farther and farther into the distance, keep pretending it's out of their hands. Who this plan doesn't serve, of course, is Colleen. A postscript and perhaps an antidote to this dolorous trip. While we were at Guantanamo, another Peaceful Tomorrows member was there too, Layla Murphy. Her week was so different from Colleen's. She was so different from Colleen. In the past few years, as founding members of Peaceful Tomorrows have grown infirm or died, a bunch of young people have joined. They're children of 9/11 victims. Layla and her sister Jessica, Liz, Aiden, a young woman named Chanel started coming to the Zoom meetings in November. Obviously, they're self-selecting, but a remarkable number of these 9/11 kids have studied Arabic and the Middle East or spent time there. Layla's becoming a lawyer. She wants to do criminal defense. Her sister's in med school. She's interested in the effects of torture on human health. The Murphy sisters have joked, darkly, that this was KSM's plan all along, to radicalize the children of 9/11 victims against their own government. During the day at Guantanamo, Layla met with attorneys, took copious notes during court. She was with two other young people, one a fellow law student, another a recently minted lawyer. In the evenings, they did what young people do, played cornhole at the tiki bar, played tennis or pickleball.
Well, it's also, I just love the sign. First dedicated pickleball courts in the Navy.
Wait, actually?
That's what it says on the sign. With like pickle clip art.
It's not that Layla was living it up. It's that she seemed to have no expectations from this trip. She was an observer in the literal sense, taking it in, noting it down. She admires Colleen and Terry and the other members of this group, but she doesn't need what they need. She's not waiting for answers from the 9/11 accused. She doesn't need a trial. And sure, a plea deal would be good. She'll lobby for that. But whatever happens to these 5 aging defendants, she doubts it'll have meaning for her. What Layla wants, what would be most meaningful to her, is an admission of guilt from the U.S. government.
Their horrible behavior is the reason we're in this situation and the reason it's dragging on for so long and the reason that they're even pleased, like there will never be any like real justice, you know, because it's just all so fucked up. The U.S.'s behavior is the reason this is dragged on.
Layla's voice dropped. A guy in military uniform was walking past, close enough to hear us.
Did you just get nervous because you saw someone who looked like military?
Yes, I did. It's classic Guantanamo.
I understood her trepidation. It feels somehow heretical, or at least ungrateful, with all these soldiers and sailors around, for Layla to say, all the government's post-9/11 effort, the endless war and the prison and the court, I know, you did it for me. You did it in my name. But none of it worked. So it's time to stop now. Just say you made a huge mistake and that you're sorry. Layla knows it's a long shot. She was 3 years old when her father died in 2001. And in all the time since, the government has never held itself accountable, has never worked to reset our common morality as a country. But this young person who's about to become a lawyer, it'd be so great if she could have this little bit of hope in the forces of the rule of law.
For 23 years, swamp politicians of left and right broke a promise to Israel. Bill Clinton said, I'm going to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish state, and I'm going to move our embassy. Because of that statute, every 6 months for 23 years, the incumbent president, Clinton, Obama, and Bush, had to send a diplomatic missive to Jerusalem saying, sorry, I know we promised this, but we're not doing it now. When my former boss was chosen by 63 million Americans to be the chief executive, he said, I'm doing this. By the way, a man whose daughter is Jewish, whose grandchildren are Jewish. He held a meeting of the National Security Council at principals level, not the bureaucrats, but the actual cabinet members. And he told them all, I'm moving the embassy and I'm recognizing Jerusalem. Only 3 members of his cabinet, shockingly, supported him. And his Secretary of Defense, this man who had very carefully built his reputation as Mad Dog Mattis, was petrified and told the president, Mr. President, don't do this. You will ignite World War III, and I don't have enough Marines to protect our embassies. What was the president's response? He said, I'm doing this for 3 reasons, Jim. Number 1, I promised the people of America who elected me during the campaign. Number 2, for 23 years, we've told the Israelis we're going to do this and we haven't. We have dishonored our oath. And 3, it's the right thing to do, Jim. We moved the embassy and no bombings, no slaughter of women at pop concerts in the desert, no men being beheaded with blunt garden hose. I watched the unedited video. 3, and I don't have enough Marines to protect our embassies. What was the president's response? He said, I'm doing this for 3 reasons, Jim. Number 1, I promised the people of America who elected me during the campaign. Number 2, for on fire.
The rest of the Arab world is having this huge separation between what their people think, because a lot of Arabs aren't really happy with Israel, but the leadership is kind of like done with the conflict and they want to move on. But it's continuing to antagonize those types of things. It's the Abraham Accords, again, these completely cut out the Palestinians from any of the conversation whatsoever. Donald Trump was a man who loved cheap victories. The idea that I could get bilateral peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, who for all intents and purposes had already basically normalized like conversations with each other. At
you
the
don't think
expense
it was
of
historic?
No. The Abraham Accords? No, absolutely not. The impetus for the Abraham Accords was, if you look at what's going on in Palestine, there's a big part of the West Bank called Area C that Israel is holding on to, and Netanyahu was essentially signaling that he was about to start to formally annex parts of these. So they formally annexed the Golan Heights a while ago. You've got East Jerusalem is more or less formally annexed now by Israel, and now they were going to start to encroach into Area Cs and formally annex that, because I think it's kind of the goal for Israel. And I think it was Qatar, I think, that might have been the first ones to say this, but like, we need to talk and do something, because if this happens, it's going to be catastrophic. And then Kushner inserted himself into this process, and then we got the Abraham Accords out of that to delay essentially the annexation of the West Bank. But again, it was a cheap win without solving any actual problems, because the big stickler right now, at least in the Gulf states and in the Levant, is Palestine and Palestinians, and Trump got us no closer to any of that. Again, a cheap win, whether it's the Abraham Accords or the Doha talks with the Taliban, in exchange for an actual real solution, which would have been lasting peace solved for Afghanistan, or an actual deal that involved the Palestinians. Donald Trump wanted neither of those, but man, we sure got a lot of really good stories and moving speeches about it.
I want one sentence or one word. I want the viewers and the listeners to note his choice of words, which is very telling. This man labeled October the 7th the result of frustrations. The murder of women and children and grandmothers is justified as the result of frustrations.
Okay.
File that away.
You got your sentence in. I didn't mean it in a dismissive way. I'm just trying to make sure that you both have the right amount of time and being fair. So the one question I think that we ought to be thinking about in terms of the geopolitics side of things is, Donald Trump could be reelected or Joe Biden could be reelected. How do you think Joe Biden is going to improve the global situation? I think we all accept that the world is on fire in terms of everything that's going on. The conflict in Ukraine, the conflict in Israel and Gaza. If Joe Biden is reelected, what gives you hope that he's going to resolve these things in the way that you talked about, having some kind of long-term solution to these very complicated, difficult issues? How do you think he'll solve that?
When I think of the 3 hotbed spots right now, in my mind, I'm thinking China and Taiwan, I'm thinking Ukraine and Russia, and I'm thinking Israel and Palestine. I think are the 3 hotbed foreign policy things right now. When I look at Joe Biden's behavior for Ukraine, I feel like it was about as well as it could have been, in that we were able to gather a wide amount of support across Europe. We were able to energize our allies. We were able to add to our NATO roster. We were able to raise a lot of money and send stuff to Ukraine, while at the same time drawing like a very clear, like, listen, we're supporting them, but we're not going to have troops on the ground. We're not going to do no-fly zones. We're not going to do anything crazy. Nothing that's going to set us on some road, that we can't turn back from to go to World War III, but we're going to support them as much as we can, basically. I wish the support would be a little bit stronger. I understand the hesitation, though, in that they don't want Ukraine to be able to strike into Russia because there's concerns about escalatory stuff there. I wish the support was a bit stronger, but I think for the most part, I think Biden's handling of the Ukraine-Russia situation was
May I pause you just there? Because
it.
On that issue, I just, my perspective is slightly different in that I understand the hesitation about offering more help, and it's a lot of money, and it doesn't enjoy as much domestic support as it did at the beginning of the conflict, etc. But I can tell you what's happening on the ground now is even though these bills are very controversial in America and they're hard to pass, that $61 billion, it's not going to make any difference on the ground. Ukraine is losing. I'm sad to say this. I was very keen advocate of us helping them. I don't know that I would agree with you that that strategy is going to be effective going forward. What I'm saying is, if the current way of dealing with that situation continues, what will happen is Ukraine will keep losing hundreds of thousands of men, as Russia will. Ukrainians will lose and lose territory, and eventually they will get a worse deal than the one that they might have done a year ago when the Ukrainians made huge advantages thanks to the weaponry and the support that the United States provided. So how do you think Joe Biden is likely to resolve that situation going forward? Because I will put it to you, what's happening now is not working.
Okay, I haven't heard the same, but maybe we talk to different people or see different things. I've got a lot of friends that go back and forth from the front lines, and I've heard there were huge complaints relating to amount of shells available or what they thought the support would look like. So, for instance, sometimes you can't advance, not because you don't have the weapons to advance, but once you advance, you don't think you have the supplies to maintain that advance.
Well, that is what's happened, right? They retook territory, and now they've been sliding back. Now, I'm not saying the artillery shells they're going to get now are going to make no difference, like in small situations, but on the big picture, it's not going to make any difference.
Well,
Ukraine
we've
is still
got
going to be sliding
F-16s
back.
are supposed to be online, I think, by the end of this year, or maybe even in the next few months. I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, I'm not going to be delusional. Ukraine winning, I think, is still probably like a less than 50% chance thing of happening. And when I say win, I mean like at least take back Donetsk and Luhansk. But I think there's an important question to be asked about, like, who's to tell Ukraine not to fight? Like, if we have the ability to supply them with weapons, and if we want to stand by them for as long as they're willing to fight, doesn't that send an important message to, say, China, where we would say we would support Taiwan, or we would support them in whatever capacity that we feel is responsible until we feel like the fight is completely over, rather than like, well, we're a democracy, so if you can make the war last for a couple of years, it's probably going to be unpopular, and we're going to pull out, which is historically like a strength or a weakness that democracies kind of have. So I think that showing support for Ukraine is important in two ways. One is the moral way, that if they want to fight, they should be enabled to. It's funny, I hear foreign people express more concern over people dying in Ukraine in this war than I've ever heard Ukrainians express. Like, I'll hear people all over the world be like, oh my God, these poor Ukrainians, they're dying, we need to stop supporting them. And then I hear Ukrainians say, we want to fight, Russia is taking our territory.
Look, my wife's Ukrainian, my mother's Ukrainian. I'm very concerned about Ukrainians dying because I have family and friends on the ground. Now, at the same time, what I've always said from day one, as I think you both know, is that Ukraine needs the support that we were giving them to get the best possible deal, because they were always going to lose territory. So I guess what I'm saying is, how is this conflict going to come to the best possible end for the Ukrainians, which is what I care about, right, under Joe Biden? How is he going to, in your opinion, resolve that? Because throwing some artillery shells at them when they get desperate every now and again doesn't seem to me like the route to what we might want for them, and also for the interest of the West.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the path forward is to supply them as much as and as long as they're willing to fight. And then once it seems like the fight is done, or Ukrainians lose the will to fight, or it's basically positioned itself into a war where no gains are being made or lost, then at that point you look for some kind of off-ramp or some kind of peace deal. So Ukraine would negotiate with Russia, with somebody mediating. I don't even know who would mediate that, but I mean, that's basically all you can do. But I'm not sure. I don't know significantly more, I guess, what the U.S. could do in that case.
Well, I guess what American people, I imagine, would want to know is, like, if we vote for Joe Biden again, how is he going to make this problem go away? I guess that's how most people would just be thinking about this.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, it's not.
I'm going to ask him all these same questions.
No, yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything the U.S. president could just make it go away. We could tell Ukraine, like, we'll stop fighting right now. But I mean,
what we could say to them is, look, we've come to the end of the road. There's clearly the domestic situation is such that we're not going to be able to give you much more. It's time to start looking for the deal.
Do you think is it the U.S.'s place to say that if Ukraine wants to continue to fight?
Well, the U.S.'s place is to decide whether the U.S. is going to provide weapons or not, and then Ukrainians can make their own decision.
But I'm saying, like, if Ukraine wants to fight, should we say, well, we don't want you to fight anymore, we're going to pull that?
No, what I think we're misunderstanding each other on is this. If the President of the United States was to say to the Ukrainians, we are not going to provide you with more weapons, the Ukrainians would then have a choice to make. They would not make the choice to keep fighting.
Yeah, of course. But that's what I'm asking, I guess, is it because we truly are making the choice for them, regardless, right? Like, if we continue to support them, we're at least enabling them to say yes or no. But if we say, okay, well, we're kind of pulling out, then you guys are done fighting. Like, is it the United States' place? If we have the opportunity and the means to help, should the United States say, we're done?
Well, that's what I'm asking you. So I guess
I don't think we should,
Just
and I
to
don't
be-
think Biden would.
So
yeah.
what I'm hearing from you is, if the United States votes for Joe Biden, he will continue to give them support at the level that he can muster, in order that they can keep fighting or not, depending on what they want.
That would be my assumption. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't see that changing.
And on this side of things, is there anything more you want to say before I go to Seb?
For Israel Palestine, I think that is an incredibly touchy issue. I don't think that Trump has the ability to navigate
focus
that.
on Biden. What would Biden do to solve that?
For Biden, I think that Biden has done a good job at providing support for an ally, which I think is always important because the United States needs to be seen as supporting people they say they'll support, while also trying to rein in Israel a bit. So I think we were saying that, I don't know how true these conversations are, but as of recently, I think Biden was telling Israel that, like, if there's a huge Rafah raid, if a bunch of people start dying, like, we're going to start to condition some of this military aid. I know that initially when they announced their invasion on the 7th, I think that we encouraged them, like, you need to wait and chill for people to actually move out of northern Gaza before you guys start attacking. I know we've pressured them a lot to allow more humanitarian aid in. That Eretz crossing opening, I think, was a really good thing. The port, the humanitarian aid port that's being built by the United States, is that the Navy Corps, the Engineering Corps? I think that was a really good idea. I would hope to see more of that, but I also imagine that this conflict is probably going to be mostly done by election season. The Rafah invasion is happening, and then after that, I don't know what else there is to do in the Gaza Strip, but I feel like whatever that situation looks like afterwards, whether that's Israel occupying Gaza for some short period of time or whatever, I think it looks better under Biden, because I think Biden is more likely to tell Israel, like, hey, like, you're not going to start building settlements here, or hey, you're not going to do this or that, because he's already sanctioned some people in the West Bank who were building outposts. I think that Biden would have a better handle on controlling Ukraine there, rather than Trump, who I feel would give a little bit more unconditional support. Controlling Israel, I think. I don't know if I just said Ukraine.
Yeah, you meant Israel. Yeah, okay. Seb, if the people of the United States vote for President Trump in 2014, how is he? You said the world's on fire. 2024. We're all getting everything wrong. Let's start again. If the the people can't do it. If the people,
if he wins, if the good guy wins.
I'm neutral in this debate, so if...
You just wrote a book on saving Western civilization.
I did. I'm not sure electing Donald Trump is the only way to do that, but if the people of the United States elect President Trump again to be their leader, you said the world is on fire. Yeah. How is he going to extinguish those fires and bring peace to the world?
Well, at the risk of talking about what I did in the White House, because they're just stories, but, I think they matter historically.
Come on, be the bigger man. Come on.
I got this question asked all the time when we were there, saying, what's President Trump's national security stance? What's his foreign policy stance? What makes him different? And I just spent 2.5 years teaching the Marines at Quantico, and I just stole their motto. I said, under President Trump as Commander-in-Chief, no better friend, no worse enemy. And it's exactly what we did. Bad guys around the world were petrified. Good guys felt safe, whether it's Israel, the UK, NATO nations. They understood American leadership was back. With regards to specific conflicts, President Trump has said what he's going to do in Ukraine. He will end the fighting very rapidly by, behind closed doors, saying to Zelensky, look, I know you want your country back, but you have to sit down and negotiate. It has to happen now, and I'll help you. And then he says to Vladimir Putin the obverse of what you were positing. He says, you need to sit down now with Kiev, or the aid we have given already will be minuscule to what I'm going to give Zelensky.
May I pause you there?
Yes.
Because this is an important thing to tease out. That is one of the reasons that to me seems like a credible way of solving that conflict. I've said this from day one. Whoever does that deal has to go in with a carrot and a stick.
Correct.
How is Donald Trump going to go in there and make the claim that he will quadruple or 10x the aid that's already been given to Ukraine when half his own party basically supports Russia at this point? I mean, that's an exaggeration. That's an unfair thing to say. But you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But that's not a public discussion. I very specifically said
but why would Putin believe that threat?
Because he's made a measure of this man for 4 years. He understands that this isn't about bluff. When you decide to use chemical weapons, we'll turn your chemical weapons base into a sheet of glass. If you're planning to kill 600 US servicemen in the Middle East, we'll kill you with a drone as you're on your way to meet the puppet prime minister of Iraq. That's what we did to Qasem Soleimani.
I know, but
he knows the words mean something.
Yes, but I'm just saying, if Putin's thinking about it logically, which I believe he is, then he will say, look, Donald Trump is saying to me he's going to throw the kitchen sink
Right.
and give everything Ukraine that they possibly could get. But at the same time, I see the internal divisions that we've talked about already. How is Donald Trump going to sell this to his own party when half of the people involved are really against helping Ukraine at all? And that seems to me like a not particularly credible threat, even if it's coming from Donald Trump.
But again, you're mixing open political communications with what is done behind closed doors.
I know,
diplomatic. He doesn't have to go to Congress and say, "I'm about to tell Vlad this, and you better back me up." That's not how it works.
Yeah, let's just clarify this. What I'm saying is, let's say that they are sitting behind closed doors. Why would Vladimir Putin believe the threat if he knows that Donald Trump can't then go back and actually sell the 10x of support to his own people?
Because it's a risky bet to say, he can't communicate this to his base, and I'm not going to take him seriously. That's a very dangerous. I mean, did you watch the Victory Day parade yesterday in Moscow?
With one tank, yes, I did.
Not just one tank. It was one T-34, not even a T-80, right? During the Cold War, it was Scud missiles, it was ZS-324s, it was hundreds of tanks. One tank from the 1930s. I don't think he can risk hundreds of thousands of Russians on the off chance that, he may not get that support from Congress. I'm just going to bluff him out.
Let me ask you a different way. Do you think it's credible to argue that Donald Trump could get the Republican Party to 10x support for Ukraine? You think he can sell that? You think he can persuade
Well, look, he
people?
wrote the art of the deal. The party is really his, with Lara, co-chair of the RNC, with a lot of the rhinos actually resigning or not running again this year. I'm worried.
But it's not the rhinos who are the problem on Ukraine.
No, it's the isolationists. But I don't think the isolationists can go up against President Trump and say, yeah, sorry, you won the election, you're the president, but we're going to,
Obviously, that's an ongoing conflict. It has been. I feel like the world has come to a point where everyone is horrified by what they're seeing, irrespective.
Be worried if skepticism is always moving you to places of greater comfort. Be very worried about that. Discomfort isn't the same as doomerism. You're like black-pilled. Oh, now I realize that all women are actually hating me because I'm not 6'2". Destiny, that's a very uncomfortable belief. What are you talking about? No, it's not. That's a very comfortable belief. You found a way to externalize all of the blame and all the responsibility for why people don't talk to you onto an external factor that's outside of your ability to control it. It would be far less comfortable to think that maybe women just don't like me because of my personality, or maybe there's some other problem I have. Do you think this explains why people who leave the left suddenly become full-on reactionary? They swap one constellation for another? Yeah, because if you leave the left, every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. There are certain truths, if you lie about them, it's immediately observable. I tell somebody that they can fly and they jump off their balcony, they clearly can't. So that's an immediate debt. For grander things, whether it's related to medicine, voting, democracy, whatever every lie you tell is moving you further and further away from reality. Depending on how abstract the thing is, it's going to take you longer to notice. But there will be a moment, if you're a liberal, you're kind of like, everybody hates you. Anti-liberal sentiments are exploding on both sides. I feel like I'm making more observations, and I feel like I'm able to incorporate things. I think I'm writing out how all of these little on how these mind things come together. And then I think the next thing I write out is okay, well, how do you be aware of these things, or how do you counter them? I think in yourself and then in other people. I'm trying to write down all these little bullshit things that I have in my brain about that I bring up a lot, just so they're written down somewhere, and then I can go back and change them later on. I'm just gonna read through these, and then if people have ideas or want to throw things out, and then we'll hop into the next thing. Okay, social incentives dictate beliefs. This is something I feel pretty strongly about. Well, I feel strongly about all of this shit. That's why I wrote it down, okay? People rarely apply a consistent rational formulation for whatever their beliefs are. This is not because people are stupid or lack the ability to do so, but rather because there's little to no incentive for doing so. Truth is simply a means to enrich our lives. For the majority of political issues, it is easier to change the truth than it is to change one's mind. There's a great incentive in believing in particular untrue things, especially when there is little practical consequences for having an incorrect understanding of an issue. Sometimes when I write things down, I just, in the process of writing things, I think you gain insight into other things as well. Because one of the things I was thinking of when I was going through this, okay, well, why is it that we can think untrue things about some things, but we can't think untrue things about other things? And I think that actually, I think a really important part of I'm going to use politically loaded terms. I don't give a this is my show. I do it. want. I need to switch out of appeasement mode. Now that I'm not on the podcast anymore. I think that conspiracy theories often rely on claims that are very ethereal or nebulous or hard to get concrete fact on. So for instance, if I go up to you and I say, actually, did you know that because Fauci lied, we can fly? You can very immediately and quickly test that. You can go jump off your balcony and fly. Oh, you can't fly. That guy's dead. Boom, you're done. When you're making these kind of like grander claims, the more abstract it is, or the more like sociological, philosophical, psychological stuff that can't be immediately hardcore tested, the easier it is to adopt false beliefs about it. I think that's an important thing. I realized that when I was like jotting a lot of this stuff down. Examples of certain social pressures. One might have family members belonging to a certain religion. Leaving that belief system might entail being completely disowned by one's family, which would lead to a significant loss of financial and social support. One might have an audience that demands to hear a certain thing, and giving a take counter to what that audience believes might cause one to incur significant financial or reputational loss. And then one might belong to a social group in school or on social media that demand adherence to certain sociopolitical beliefs, and betraying those beliefs or not showing strong support for them might result in a person being thrown out of said social group. Another thing I realized when I was writing this down is something that I talked about in the past is, well, if you really want to change somebody's mind, the best way to do it is very slowly over time. You need to be their friend. You need to be patient, blah, 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 blah. What I realized when I thought about that, and then I'm like, well, I wonder if, like, how many things did I say in the past that I agree with or disagree with now? What I realized is that process of like slowly helping somebody over time is actually just like another social pressure. It's just you becoming a friend and then applying a soft social pressure to provide them an incentive to change, basically. Oh, I've got this person that's a friend here, and now they want me to like change my beliefs, so they're trying to change me on something, and now there's a bit of an incentive there that's been created to change it because you want to like maintain that friendship, basically. For many of the social and political beliefs we hold and value today, being factually correct offers little to no reward. Whether or not you know the factual details about a particular shooting, war, catastrophe, or medicine is very rarely relevant, since that belief is not factually tested on a day-to-day basis, is not empirically tested. Let's analyze a controversial event, the Rittenhouse trial concerning the 2020 shootings in Kenosha, Illinois, and think about the social incentives on both sides, assuming you're a part of a social structure that is pro-BLM. On some of these I do liberal, and some of these I do conservative. So the rewards for having factually accurate beliefs, assuming you're not someone whose job relies on getting the facts correct, like a prosecutor, lawyer, journalist, or someone working in the system, there is no reward for being factually correct about anything relating to Rittenhouse. You really don't. There's like let's say that you know, like, oh, it was only a 15-mile drive when you say across state lines. Like, there's no reward for pointing that out. Punishment for having factually accurate beliefs. If you're in any social circles that are staunchly pro-BLM, expressing certain factual accuracies about the events of that night might lead to you being ostracized from your groups or webbed as a white supremacist. So pointing out, a particular thing people might think, oh, well, that's contrary to my narrative, at least, or it feels like you're pointing out a fact that might be contrary to that. Yeah, for having correct beliefs, it doesn't seem like there's a great reward. You could be punished for having correct beliefs. And then for having factually inaccurate beliefs, depending on what you get wrong, people might celebrate you for having incorrect beliefs, especially if you're overstating the wrongdoings of Rittenhouse or understating the actions of the assailants. Common examples of wrong beliefs being rewarded might be like, Rittenhouse was spraying his magazine into the crowd. I remember when Vosh said that to me. Or the person chasing Rittenhouse only threw a plastic bag. How scary, right? Neither of these things are accurate summations of what happened, but there's like a good reward, a social reward there for being incorrect about that. And then the punishment for having factually inaccurate beliefs. Assuming your inaccurate beliefs are cutting against Rittenhouse, you're unlikely to face any repercussions or even corrections about having inaccurate beliefs relating to Rittenhouse. A gentle correction is likely the most you'd ever experience. Given the incentive structures for and against certain beliefs, there's little reason to expect someone to strive for factual accuracy, and every reason to believe people would try to adhere to their social groups as much as possible. This is like when I say social structure dictates or incentivizes beliefs, this is what I'm talking about here. Rittenhouse shooting happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, right? Yes. Why did I say Illinois? Why did I think it was Illinois? Is that where he drove from? Sorry. Okay, so the constellation of beliefs. Rather than starting from some epistemically humble foundation and individually constructing beliefs, people inherit constellations of beliefs from the social groups they find themselves in, often due to social pressure that push them towards these belief systems. These constellations of beliefs will share some similar hollow chains of logic, but they're ultimately absorbed at the applied level for most people and often have little to no thought put into them before they're accepted as a person's own beliefs. These beliefs are always somewhat abstract as well, meaning there's no immediate corrective mechanism that exists in the real world to counter them, as they always make claims that are either just out of our ability to perceive them, directly perceive them, or will come at some point in the future, though they rarely, if ever, manifest. Here's an example from 2024. This is the anti-establishment constellation. So I drew up some beliefs here. So you support Donald Trump. You think Donald Trump is being unfairly prosecuted. You believe in the elite ruling class. You think the 2016 election was stolen. You don't trust any of the mainstream media. You don't trust the vaccine. You think that COVID was largely overblown and all forms of lockdown were unnecessary. You support Brexit. You don't trust most U.S. institutions, especially intelligence agencies or anything related to health, healthcare. You think that Andrew Tate is being unfairly targeted. You oppose most woke-coded things like transgenderism, affirmative action, feminism, etc. Although Trump said the 2016 one was going to be stolen too. But evidence of the existence of these constellations is supported. Evidence constellations is supported by the following. So here's these are things that I think point to these constellations of beliefs existing. One is a high degree of congruency between many people who are part of these constellations, meaning if you jump through any people, they'll all have these same beliefs. Like if you go to a group of people, they'll all have these same shared beliefs. You guys will make fun of the marching orders from mainstream media, but I bet every single alternative media guy in here is anti-vax, thinks COVID came from a bioweapons lab, thinks that Russia has a right to invade Ukraine, thinks that all the charges against Donald Trump are made up, thinks that we shouldn't be supporting Israel. You guys have literally copy-pasted the same opinions between every single one of you, and you guys are talking like an army of NPCs about how the mainstream media gives you fabricated opinions. It doesn't even make sense.
Yes, we do all think the truth. That is
crazy how truth can be a perspective there, huh? But when you all think the same thing, it's not a conspiracy, but when the mainstream media does, it is a conspiracy. Crazy how that works. Two is high likelihood that a person possessing a single belief in this constellation will possess many of the others. So if I ask somebody what they think about mRNA vaccines based on their answer, if they say, no, I don't trust that, I can probably predict 95% of this, they're going to believe this. Three, parts of the constellation appear to be highly contradictory to each other, meaning when you start to dig into some of these, they don't make sense. How can you believe both of these things at once? I think I give examples of that down here. Four is webbing. When someone hears, so I used to say webbing all the time, and now with these frameworks, I think I can understand the webbing a bit more. When someone hears that you have a belief that's part of another constellation they're aware of, they will instantly assume that you have a plethora of other beliefs immediately, since they are projecting their own adherence to a constellation onto you. So, when I say something along the lines of I think this particular thing, and then they assume this, and this, it's because they're ascribing in their mind a constellation of things that I believe in, whether they're doing it consciously or not. I think that's where the webbing thing comes from. Arguably, I'm doing it, although the implication is webbing is incorrect when you do it. But arguably, I'm doing it when somebody gives me a belief here, and I'm able to say well, do you think this, and this? Okay. It becomes incredibly difficult to break anyone out of any given constellation because there's always some underlying transcendental entity that can explain every single part of why the constellation is true. Even evidence that seems to be in opposition to any particular belief is reinterpreted through the transcendental entity and becomes evidence for the particular belief. I'm biting a little bit of this language from, there's a big Reddit post some guy wrote on this a while ago, and the idea that there's some larger than life concept that's backing all of this basically. Examples of this in relation to the earlier anti-establishment constellation. So here's just quotes where people are saying things where I feel like they're constellation, or I feel like they're contradictory. So I don't trust the mainstream media, but the New York Post was just an example of someone trying to do the right thing for once. My mom used to say stuff like this, Mom, you think that they tried to steal the 2020 election, right? She's like, I know they did. Well, what about 2016? Why didn't they steal that election? And she's like, well, that was just enough people came out to do the right thing. The fact that we were able to win was amazing. And it's okay, wait, so when you win, it's even more proof that you're fighting against a corrupt system. Okay. I don't trust any part of our government, and Donald Trump isn't technically a part of the government. That's why they hate him so much, because even though he's the president, he's not like them. The idea that Donald Trump, who is the largest politician in the world, being the U.S. president and is also a billionaire elite, isn't somehow part of the elite or the system is hilarious to me. I'm sorry, I should be more precise. Rather than hilarious, it's obviously contradictory. If anybody is an elite, it's going to be a billionaire real estate mogul from New York City, right? I don't believe anything the intelligence agencies say, except for when they say things that I agree with, when some when some say that COVID probably came from a lab. So I noticed, for instance, a lot of people don't trust any of our intelligence agencies, but when it's not the NIH. One of our intelligence agencies flipped their opinion on COVID coming from a lab to, I think they said that it was somewhat probable or kind of likely, over 50%. I don't remember which one it was, but man, you better believe that as soon as they said that, everybody started citing like, oh, look, U.S. intelligence is saying that. And it's like, interesting. So now we trust them a lot, okay? I never trust special investigators like Mueller, but I do trust some like Durham, but I definitely don't trust people like Comey when he refuses to press charges against Hillary, but I definitely did trust him when he gave that scathing review of her email use. So like the selectively picking like when you trust a person is basically always going to line up with when it makes you feel good. Donald Trump is an amazing leader. It's not his fault every person he nominated or worked with ended up backstabbing him. He's such a good leader that they had to come together like never before to stop him. So every time the system attacks Trump, it's even more evidence that he's even more competent, and that's why they have to work so hard against him. It's like, okay. The election was rigged, even though Trump's own nominated lawyers, campaign managers, and White House staff said otherwise, and it was only rigged in the states that he lost, even if the means to rig it were done months ahead of the actual election and went completely unchallenged, which is like none of it like really makes sense. But again, they're all like inherited at the applied level, so... okay, sorry, 4 more of these. Normative confusion with applied positions. Oh, I tried to like formalize this. I don't know if I like the syllogism I've written for this or if I want to change it or not. I don't know, but rather than building beliefs from a logical foundation, people tend to inherit constellations of beliefs from their social circles due to misaligned incentives that reward beliefs for social validation rather than factual accuracy. Since there was never any work done to arrive at applied positions through some logic, applied positions are quickly and easily confused with moral positions. Here are some examples expressed as syllogisms where the first proposition is a moral claim, the second proposition claims to remedy an injury to said moral claim, and the conclusion demands that we follow through to cure the moral deficiency listed in the first proposition. To cure the injury. This should just be injury, I think. Moral injury? To cure the morally egregious injury, maybe. Egregious? I don't think I'm spelling that right. Okay, so I think that the formula would be like, so premise 1 is a moral claim. Premise 2 is something that supports or that purports to support the moral claim. It should be to remedy. I can be more precise here. Premise 1 is the moral injury. Premise 2 is going to be something that purports to cure the moral injury. And then the conclusion is a demand to follow premise 2 to satisfy basically premise 1. To cure premise 1, I'll say. So an example of this might be, so premise 1 is homelessness should not exist in the United States. Premise 2 would be free public housing would solve homelessness. The conclusion would be, therefore, we should adopt free public housing. Premise 1 for this would be civilians should not be targeted in war. Premise 2 would be a charge of genocide would force Israel to stop killing civilians. The conclusion would be, therefore, we should charge Israel with genocide. Should not be killed. I'll say targeted. I'll keep it at targeted. And the prior examples, if you disagree with premise 2, you necessarily disagree with the conclusion, but your interlocutors will assume that you also disagree with premise 1 as it becomes intrinsically tied to the conclusion since premise 2 is considered unquestionable. Premise 2 is most likely unquestionable as it is inherited as part of the constellation of beliefs, meaning that the individual has done no work to actually investigate premise 2, nor do they have any incentive to do so. That means that if you disagree that we should adopt public housing, so for instance, if you disagree that hold on. So let's say that you disagree with the conclusion here for this because the argument's not sound, okay? You're fighting on the soundness. Do I need to go over soundness versus validity again? We remember this, right? Valid just means that the conclusion follows deductively from the premises. Deductive meaning it's always true, assuming you're applying to some system of logic. And then soundness means that one of the premises are untrue. So like an argument that would go, premise 1 is all men are immortal. Premise 2, Socrates is a man. Conclusion, Socrates is immortal. That would be a valid argument because from the premises stem the conclusion, but it wouldn't be sound because all men are not immortal. Only I'm immortal, okay? Sounding is also when you shove rods in your dick, which is weird. In the prior examples, if you disagree with premise 2, you necessarily disagree with the conclusion, because disagreeing with any premises means you disagree with the conclusion, because it's not a valid argument. But your interlocutors will assume that you also disagree with premise 1, as it becomes intrinsically tied to the conclusion, since premise 2 is considered unquestionable. P2 is most likely unquestionable, as it is inherited as part of the constellation of beliefs, meaning that the individual has done no work to actually investigate P2, nor do they have any incentive to do so. Just restating that. Okay. This means that if you disagree that we should adopt public housing, it's because you believe that homelessness should exist in the United States. Or if you believe that we shouldn't charge Israel with genocide, you believe that civilians should be targeted in war. So anytime I think you reject P2 from somebody, they assume, because P2 is like unquestionable, they think that you're rejecting P1. And then that's where a lot of this weird, I call these the bubbles that connect, but I guess I'm titling here normative confusion with applied positions. This means that if you disagree that we should adopt public... Oh, wait, I'll read this. This form of irrationality is incredibly destructive due to how quickly someone is to ascribe to you an entire constellation of beliefs. And likely they will ascribe to you all of the same moral reversals as they have in the singular example that you've disagreed with. Here's an example constellation for someone who's progressive. Systemic racism is real and is a huge driver of racial inequity, and is the main driver, I should say, and is the main driver of racial inequities. Healthcare should be free to all. Education should be free to all. Trans rights are unquestionable for all ages. Housing should not be commodified. Profit is immoral. Any one of these beliefs could be extracted. Like the syllogisms above, it could be extracted and put in and expressed. Can you say syllogistically? I don't know if that's the word. And expressed in syllogisms like above, as above, and subsequently reversed on you if you disagree with any part of their construction. So P1, workers shouldn't be exploited. P2, eliminating profit would eliminate most worker exploitation. The conclusion would be profit should be eliminated. If you disagree with the soundness of premise 2, well, I don't know if eliminating profit gets rid of worker exploitation, then people will think, oh, so you think workers should be exploited, because they don't see you as fighting on the premises. They see you as rejecting every single part of the argument, right? P1, everyone is entitled to free healthcare. P2, Medicare for all would provide free healthcare to everyone. Conclusion, we should have Medicare for all. If you reject P2, well, would Medicare for all really make the system better? They think, oh, so you don't think everybody should have health care. A denial of the second premise on either of these would lead to denial of the conclusion, but most people would see it as a denial of the first premise, a rejection of the entire argument. I think this is